So, World Special Forum and Open Space, some sort of Comintern which would centralize and try to speak for the entire movement would be a disaster. Is totalitarianism the only means of eliminating capitalism? A genuine socialist order can be achieved through the struggle, not endless and often not so meaningful debates. A permanent process of seeking and building alternatives, plural, diversified, non-confessional, non-governmental, and non-party context. Neoliberalism, alternative word bush is old wine in a new bottle. It is a dangerous form of capitalism that must be eliminated at all costs, or could it be something good? We are as confused as you are. On the one hand, a persistent presence of an old style of leftist politics, a bit repetitive and hollow in its discourse. On the other, a rich, diverse, anarchic force, impossible to condense in terms of common themes. So this is hi World Social Forum and Open Space we are discussing. यहाँ पे क्या है ये? It is fine that the Mumbai Resistance 2004 is confronting the so-called World Social Forum and exposing its reformists and counter-revolutionary character, its undemocratic practices and processes, and its dependence on funding from imperialist states and big businesses. The WSF seeks to derail and cope the growing militancy of the people against imperialist globalization and war and redirect this towards reformism in order to perpetuate the world capitalist system. It includes political bosses of the imperialist and puppet states, but excludes representatives of national liberation movement in accordance with its pro-imperialist ideological and political bias so evident in its charter of principles. It maligns armed revolutionary movement as totalitarian reductionists, violence to the people, inhuman and uncivil. It harps on civil society as to mean good citizenship and docile non-governmental organizations under the bourgeois state system whose violence is directed against the working people. It paints civil society as an equal party in a raunchy menace toys with the bourgeois state and big business. Now let's talk about in this final chapter of the book, we look at globalization, something that has been referred to in the many chapters of this book and textbooks of many other subjects. We begin by analyzing the concept of globalization and then examine its causes. We then discuss at length the political, economic, and cultural consequences of globalization. Our interest is also in the studying the impact of globalization on India as well as how India is affecting globalization. We finally draw attention to resistance to the globalization and how social movements in India also form part of this resistance. So many Nepalese workers came to India to work. Is that globalization? Go through newspapers for a week and collect clippings on anything related to the globalization. The concept of globalization. Janardhan works in a call center. He leaves late in the evening for work. Becomes John when he enters his office, acquires a new accent and speaks a different language than he does when he is at home to communicate with his clients who are living thousands of miles away. He works all night, which is actually daytime, for his overseas customers. Janardhan is rendering a service to somebody who, in all probability, he is never likely to meet physically. This is his daily routine. His holidays also do not correspond to the Indian calendar but to those of his clients who happen to be from in the US. And Ramdhari has gone shopping to buy a birthday gift for his 9-year-old daughter. He has promised her a small cycle and decides to search the market for something he finds affordable as well as of reasonable quality. He finally does buy a cycle which is actually manufactured in China but is being marketed in India. It meets his requirements of quality as well as affordability, and Ramdhari decides to go ahead with his purchase. Last year, Ramdhari, on his daughter's insistence, had bought her a Barbie doll which was originally manufactured in the US but was being sold in India. Sarika is a first generation learner who has done remarkably well throughout her school and college life by working very hard. And she now has an opportunity to take on a job and begin an independent career. Independent career which the women of her family had never dreamed of earlier. While some of her relatives are opposed, she finally decides to go ahead because of the new opportunities that have been made available to her generation. All three examples illustrate an aspect each of what we call globalization. In the first instance, Janardhan was participating in the globalization of services. Ramdhari's birthday purchases tell us something about the movement of commodities from one part of the world to the another. Sarika is faced with a conflict of values, partly originating from a new opportunity that earlier was not available to the women in her family, but today is part of a reality that has gained wider acceptability. If we look for examples of the use of the term globalization in real life, we will realize that it is used in the various contexts. Let us look at some examples different from the ones that we have looked above. Some farmers committed suicide because their crops failed. They had bought very expensive seeds supplied by a multinational company, MNC. An Indian company bought a major rival company based in the Europe despite protests by some of the current owners. Many retail shopkeepers fear that they would lose their livelihoods if some major international companies opened retail chains in the country. A film producer in Mumbai was accused of lifting the story of his film from the another film made in the Hollywood. A militant group issued a statement threatening college girls who wear Western clothes. These examples show us that globalization need not always be positive. It can have negative consequences for the people indeed. There are many who believe that globalization has more negative consequences than the positive. These examples also show us that globalization need not be only about the economic issues, nor is the direction of influence always from the rich to the poor countries. Since much of the usage trends to be imprecise, it becomes important to clarify what we mean by the globalization. Globalization as a concept fundamentally deals with the flows, and these flows could be various kinds, ideas moving from one part of the world to the another, capital shunted between two or more places, commodities being traded across the borders, and people moving in search of better livelihoods to different parts of the world. The crucial element is the worldwide interconnectedness that is created and sustained as a consequence of these constant flows. The chapter this chapter has a series of images about the political, economic, and cultural aspects of the globalization taken from the different parts of the world. These are some images. Much of the Chinese stuff that comes to India is smuggled. Does globalization lead to smuggling also? तो ये कुछ मतलब क्वेश्चंस हैं जो कि आपको आंसर करते रहना है. Isn't globalization a new name for imperialism? Why do we need a new name? इधर जो है ये क्या है, इधर ये डिजिटल इकोनॉमी को शो किया गया है. नाउ नेक्स्ट इज ग्लोबलाइजेशन इज अ मल्टी डायमेंशनल कंसेप्ट. इट हैज़ पॉलिटिकल, इकोनॉमिक एंड कल्चरल मैनिफेस्टेशंस एंड these must be adequately distinguished. It is wrong to assume that globalization has purely economic dimensions, just as it would also be mistaken to assume that it is purely cultural phenomenon, and the impact of globalization is vastly uneven. It affects some societies more than the others and some parts of some societies more than the others, and it is important to avoid drawing general conclusions about the impact of globalization without paying sufficient attention to the specific context. उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो क्या है, नेक्स्ट जो है वो है causes of globalization. What accounts for the globalization? If globalization is about the flows of ideas, capitals, commodities, and people, it is perhaps logical to ask if there is anything novel about this phenomenon. Globalization in terms of these four flows has taken place through much of the human history. However, those who have argued that there is something distinct about the contemporary globalization point out that it is the scale and speed of these flows that accounts for the uniqueness of the globalization. In the contemporary era, globalization has a strong historical basis, and it is important to view contemporary flows against this backdrop. उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है? While globalization is not caused by any single factor, technology remains a critical element. There is no doubt that the invention of the telegraph, the telephone, and the microchip in more recent times has revolutionized communication between different parts of the world. When printing initially came into being, it laid the basis for the creation of nationalism. So also today we should expect that technology will affect the way we think of our personal but also our collective lives, and the ability of ideas, capital, commodities, and people to move more easily from one part of the world to the another has been made possible largely by technological advances, and the pace of these flows may vary. For instance, the movement of the capital and commodities will most likely be quicker and wider than the movement of peoples across different parts of the world. Globalization, however, does not emerge merely because of the availability of improved communications. What is important is for people in different parts of the world to recognize these interconnections with the rest of the world. Currently, we are aware of the fact that events taking place in one part of the world could have an impact on the another part of the world The bird flu or tsunami is not confined to any particular nation. It does not respect national boundaries. Similarly, when major economic events takes place, their impact is felt outside their immediate local, national or regional environment at the global level. उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है? Political consequences. One of the debates that has been generated as a consequence of contemporary process of globalization relates to its ongoing political impact. How does globalization affect traditional conceptions of the state sovereignty? There are at least three aspects that we need to consider when answering this question. At the most simple level, globalization results in an erosion of the state capacity, that is, the ability of government to do what they do all over the world. And the old welfare state is now giving way to a more minimalist state that performs certain core functions, such as the maintenance of law and order and the security of its citizens. However, it withdraws from many of its earlier welfare functions directed at economic and social well being. In place of the welfare state, it is the market that becomes the prime determinant of the economic and social priorities. The entry and the increased role of the multinational companies all over the world leads to a reduction in the capacity of governments to take decisions on their own. At the same time, globalization does not always reduce state capacity, and the primacy of the state continues to be the unchallenged basis of political community, and the old jealousies and rivalries between countries have not ceased to matter in world politics, and the state continues to discharge its essential functions, law and order, national security, and consciously withdraws from certain domains from which it wishes to. States continue to be important. Indeed, in some respects, state capacity has received a boost as a consequence of globalization, with enhanced technologies available at the disposal of the state to collect information about its citizens. With this information, the state is better able to rule, not less able. The states becomes more powerful than they were earlier as an outcome of the new technology. इधर क्या है ये है yesterday and ये है today की बात. तो ये है finish your dinner. There are people in China and India who are starving. ये yesterday की बात है. Today की क्या बात है? ये finish your homework. There are people in China and India who are starving for your job. इधर जो है ये क्या है? Economic consequences. While everything may not be known about the economic facets of globalization, this particularly dimension shapes a large part of the content and direction of contemporary debates surrounding globalization. A part of the problem has to do with defining economic globalization itself, and the mention of economic globalization draws our attention immediately to the role of international institutions like the IMF and the World Trade Organization and the role they play in determining economic policies across the world. Yet, globalization must not be viewed in such narrow terms. Economic globalization involves many actors other than these international institutions. A much broader way of understanding of economic globalization requires us to look at the distribution of economic gains, that is, who gets the most from globalization and who gets less, indeed, who loses from it. What is often called economic globalization usually involves greater economic flows among the different countries of the world. Some of this is voluntary and some forced by the international institutions and powerful countries, as we saw in the examples at the beginning of this chapter. This flow or exchange can take various forms: commodities, capital, people, and ideas. Globalization has involved greater trade in the commodities across the globe, and the restrictions imposed by the different countries on allowing the imports of the other countries have been reduced. Similarly, the restrictions on movement of capital across the countries have also been reduced. In operational terms, it means that investors in the rich countries can invest their money in countries other than their own, including developing countries where they might get better returns. Globalization has also led to the flow of ideas across the national boundaries. The spread of internet and the computer related services is an example of that, but globalization has not led to the same degree of increase in the movement of people across the globe. Developed countries have carefully guarded their borders with the visa policies to ensure that citizens of the other countries cannot take away the jobs of their own citizens. In thinking about the consequences of globalization, it is necessary to keep in mind that the same set of the policies do not lead to the same results everywhere. While globalization has led to similar economic policies adopted by the governments in different parts of the world, this has generated vastly different outcomes in the different parts of the world. It is again crucial to pay attention to the specific context rather than make simple generalizations in this connection. Economic globalization has created an intense division of opinion all over the world. Those who are concerned about the social about the social justice are worried about the extent of state withdrawal caused by the processes of economic globalization. They point out that it is likely to benefit only a small section of the population while impoverishing those who were dependent on the government for the jobs and welfare, education, health, sanitation, etc. They have emphasized the needs to ensure institutional safeguards or creating social safety nets to minimize the negative effects of the globalization on those who are economically weak. Many movements all over the world feel that safety nets are insufficient or unworkable. They have called for a halt to forced economic globalization, for its results would lead to economic ruin for the weaker countries, especially for the poor within these countries. Some economists have described economic globalization as recolonization of the world. Advocates of the economic globalization argue that it generates greater economic growth and well-being for the largest section of the population where there is a deregulation. Greater trade among the countries allows each economy to do what it does best. This would benefit the whole world. And they also argue that economic globalization is inevitable and it is not wise to resist the march of history. More moderate supporters of globalization say that globalization provides a challenge that can be responded to intelligently without accepting it uncritically. What, however, cannot be denied is the increased momentum towards interdependence and integration between the governments, businesses, and ordinary people in different parts of the world as a result of globalization. Now, cultural consequences. The consequences of globalization are not confined only to the sphere of politics and economy. Globalization affects us in our home, in what we eat, drink, wear, and indeed in what we think. It shapes what we think are our preferences. And the cultural effect of globalization leads to the fear that this process poses a threat to the culture in the world. It does so because globalization leads to the rise of a uniform culture, or what is called cultural homogenization. The rise of a uniform culture is not the emergence of a global culture. What we have in the name of global culture is the imposition of Western culture on the rest of the world. This phenomenon is known as the soft power of the US hegemony. Now make a list of products of multinational companies that are used by you and your family. इधर जो है ये क्या है, invading new markets. This is the like cartoon, and then उसके बाद जो next है ये क्या दिखा रखा है एक image. When we talk about the safety net, it means that we expect some people to fall down because of globalization, isn't it? That right? उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है? The popularity of a burger or blue jeans, some argue, has a lot to do with the powerful influence of the American way of life. Thus, the culture of the politically and economic dominant society leaves its imprint on a less powerful society, and the world begins to look more like the dominant power wishes it to be. Those who make this argument often draw attention to the McDonaldization of the world, with cultures seeking to buy into the dominant American dream. This is dangerous not only for the poor countries but for the whole of humanity, for it leads to the shrinking of the rich culture heritage of the entire globe. At the same time, it would be a mistake to assume that culture consequences of the globalization are only negative. Cultures are not static things. All cultures accept outside influences all the time. Some external influences are negative because they reduce our choices, but sometimes external influences simply enlarge our choices, and sometimes they modify our culture without overwhelming the traditional. The burger is no substitute for a masala dosa and therefore does not pose any real challenge. It is simply added on to our food choices. Blue jeans, on the other hand, can go well with the homespun khadi kurta. Here, the outcome of the outside influence is a new combination that is unique, a khadi kurta worn over jeans. Interestingly, this clothing combination has been exported back to the country that gave us blue jeans so that it is possible to see young Americans wearing a kurta and jeans. While cultural homogenization is an aspect of globalization, the same process also generates precisely the opposite fact. It leads to each culture becoming more different and distinctive, and this phenomenon is called cultural heterogenization. This is not to deny that there remains differences in powers when cultures interact, but instead more fundamentally to suggest that culture exchange is rarely one way. इधर क्या है ये Ghosh and Indian again. An insider's view of a call center job, working in a call center, in fact, can be enlightening in its own way. As you handle calls from the Americans, you get an insight into the true American culture. An average American comes out as more lively and honest than we imagine. However, not all calls and conversations are pleasant. You can also receive irate and abusive callers. Sometimes the hatred that they exhibit in their tone or on knowing that their call has been routed to India is very stressful. Americans tend to perceive every Indian as one who has denied them their rightful job. One can receive a call beginning on the lines of "I spoke to a South African a few minutes ago, and now I am speaking to an Indian," or "Oh gosh, an Indian again connects me to an American, please." It is difficult to find the right response in situations of this kind. Source क्या है इसका? रिपोर्ट बाय रंजिथा यूआरएस इन द हिंदू एंड 10 जनवरी 2005 को ये जो है कंटेंट लिखा गया था. इधर हमने क्या बात किया था? At the same time, it would be a mistake to assume that cultural consequences of globalization are only negative. Cultures are not static things. All cultures accept outside influences all the time. Some external influences are negative because they reduce our choices, but sometimes external influences simply enlarge our choices, and sometimes they modify our culture without overwhelming the traditional. And the burger is no substitute for a masala dosa, and therefore does not pose any real challenge. It is simply added on to our food choices. Blue jeans, on the other hand, can go well with the homespun khadi kurta. And here, the outcome of the outside influence is a new combination that is unique, a khadi kurta worn over jeans. Interestingly, this clothing combination has been exported back to the country that gave us blue jeans so that it is possible to see young Americans wearing a kurta and jeans. While cultural homogenization is an aspect of globalization, the same process also generates precisely the opposite effect. It leads to each culture becoming more different and distinctive, and this phenomenon is called as cultural heterogenization. This is not to deny that there remain differences and powers when cultures interact, but instead more fundamentally to suggest that cultural exchange is rarely one way. India and globalization. We said earlier that globalization has occurred in earlier period in history in different parts of the world. Flows pertaining to the movement of capital, commodities, ideas, and people go back several centuries in Indian history. During the colonial period, as a consequence of Britain's imperial ambitions, India became an exporter of primary goods and raw materials and a consumer of finished goods. After independence, because of this experience with the British, we decided to make things ourselves rather than relying on others. We also decided not to allow others to export to us, so that our own producers could learn to make things, and this protectionism generated its own problems. While some advances were made in certain arenas, critical sectors such as health, housing, and primary education did not receive the attention they deserved. India had a fairly sluggish rate of economic growth. In 1991, responding to a financial crisis and to the desire for the high rates of economic growth, India embarked on a program of economic reforms that has sought increasingly to deregulate various sectors, including trade and foreign investments. While it may be too early to say how good this has been for the India, the ultimate test is not high growth rates as making sure that the benefits of growth are shared so that everyone is better off. उसके बाद है resistance to the globalization. We have already noted that globalization is a very contentious subject and has invited strong criticism all over the globe. Critics of globalization make a variety of arguments. Those on the left argue that the contemporary globalization represents a particular phase of global capitalism that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Weakening of the state leads to a reduction in the capacity of the states to protect the interest of its poor. Critics of globalization from the political right expresses anxiety over the political, economic, and cultural effects. In political terms, they also fear the weakening of the state economically, and they want a return to the self-reliance and protectionism, at least in certain areas of the economy. Culturally, they are worried that traditional culture will be harmed and people will lose their age old values and ways. It's important to note here that anti globalization movements too participate in the global networks, aligning with those who feel like them in the other countries. Many anti globalization movements are not opposed to the idea of globalization per se as much as they are opposed to a specific program of globalization, which they see as a form of imperialism. In 1999, at the World Trade Organization WTO ministerial meeting, there were widespread protests at Seattle alleging unfair trading practices by the economically powerful states. It was argued that the interests of the developing world were not given sufficient importance in the evolving global economic system. It is true, sometimes I like the new songs. Didn't we all like to dance a bit? Does it really matter if it is influenced by the Western music? उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो क्या है इधर, लेट्स डू इट टुगेदर. द एक्टिविटी enables the students to understand how globalization has penetrated our lives and the impact the all inclusive nature of globalization has an individual, a community and a nation as a whole. इसमें स्टेप्स क्या है, स्टूडेंट्स आर to the list the names of products, food products, white goods and luxuries they are familiar with. Students are to write down their favorite TV programs and the teacher is to collect the list and consolidate, divide the classroom into convenient groups and assign each group a number of items depends on how exhaustive the list is. And TV programs, let students find out. The teacher is to collect the list and consolidate, divide the classroom into the convenient groups and assign each group a number of items depends on how exhaustive the list is. And TV programs, let students find out who are the manufacturers of the products they use every day and the makers sponsors of their favorite TV programs. The teacher is to by involving students classify the names of the manufacturers and makers of sponsors collected by the students into three categories: exclusive foreign companies, exclusive Indian companies and companies working in the collaboration. Ideas for the teacher. The teacher is to debrief the students, focusing on how globalization has been impacting our lives, drawing the attention of the students to different phases of the globalization as we use more foreign goods. Our own small scale industries have been losing their customers and are closing down. The activity could be concluded by introducing students to the ongoing debates about the impact of globalization on the developing and developed countries. The World Social Forum, that is WSF, is another global platform which brings together a wide coalition composed of human rights activists, environmentalists, labor, youth, and women activists opposed to neoliberal globalization. The World Social Forum is another global platform which brings together a wide coalition composed of human rights activists, environmentalists, labor, youth, and women activists opposed to neoliberal globalization. The first World Special Forum meeting was organized in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2001, and the fourth WSF meeting has held in Mumbai in 2004, and the latest WSF meeting was held in Nepal in February 2024. Around now, India and resistance to the globalization. So, what has been India's experience in resisting globalization? Social movements play a role in helping people make sense of the world around them and finding ways to deal with the matters that trouble them. Resistance to the globalization in India has come from different quarters. There have been left-wing protests to economic liberalization voiced through the political parties, as well as through the forum like the Indian Social Forum. Trade unions of industrial workforce, as well as those representing farmer interests, have organized protests against the entry of the multinationals, and the patenting of certain plants like neem by American and European firms has also generated considerable opposition. Resistance to the globalization has also come from the political right, and this has taken the form of objecting particularly to the various cultural influences ranging from the availability of foreign TV channels provided by cable networks, celebration of Valentine's Day, and westernization of the dress tastes of the girl students in schools and colleges. फिर ऐसे काम ही क्यों करते हो आप शिकायत वाले? बी अ गुड गर्ल. यहाँ पे ना वर्ल्ड पॉलिटिकल मैप दिखाया गया है. तो इसमें एक तो दिखा रखा नॉर्थ पैसिफिक ओशन, साउथ पैसिफिक ओशन. इट मीन्स दिस इज वन पैसिफिक ओशन. फिर उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो है ये आर्कटिक ओशन. क्या है ये इधर? आर्कटिक ओशन. फिर उसके बाद नेक्स्ट जो है ये है नॉर्थ अटलांटिक ओशन एंड ये है एक साउथ अटलांटिक ओशन. तो इसको भी हम एक ही कंसिडर करेंगे, ठीक है. उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो है एक आर्कटिक ओशन। क्या है ये? आर्कटिक ओशन। और फिर क्या है ये? इंडियन ओशन है। क्या है ये? इंडियन ओशन। ठीक है। तो वर्ल्ड में ये कौन कौन से मेन मेन जो ओशन थे? नॉर्थ पैसिफिक ओशन, साउथ पैसिफिक ओशन, इट मीन्स ओनली वन, दिस इज पैसिफिक ओशन। और क्या क्या दिखा रखा है यहाँ पे? इस मैप को आई थिंक डेली देखना चाहिए टू अंडरस्टैंड दी कंटेम्प्रेरी वर्ल्ड पॉलिटिक्स। ये कहाँ पे क्या क्या है?